Hello and welcome to the Pball UV layout tutorial for fall 2010. This is for the class Pipelines for Interactives taught by Scott Easley. I'm the TA for fall 2010, Jesse Bush, and I'll be leading you through the UV unwrapping of the Ball. For this tutorial, I'm assuming you've already modeled the Ball and that each piece of the Ball is separate. Also, I'm going to kind of assume you have a Ball layer where everything is added. I don't know if I'll actually be using this throughout the course of the UV tutorial, but I'm going to just keep it there just in case. Now, for the UV layout tutorial, step 1, we're going to work our way from the bottom to the top just like we did for the modeling tutorial. That means we're going to start with the Phantasm Ball's bottom half sphere. Now, this is the one part of the tutorial where we have a branching path here. I have another version of the Phantasm Ball base I've prepared just for this situation. If we go Window and we open the UV texture editor, we'll notice that if I select this Phantasm Ball base, it's got this pattern of 1, 1, 2, 1. It's got one row on the edge like such, where if I select the other Phantasm Ball, you'll notice it has a slightly offset pattern where this row over here was usually over here for the other Phantasm Ball. The version we need is this one here, where it's got the alternating pattern, but it has these things on the edge, these taller bits on the edge, unlike this one where the one taller bit we need is on the wrong side. If you have it like this already, you're lucky. You cut your faces and cut and extruded the faces on the Phantasm Ball just so that it happened to lay out this way. This is pure happen chance, since it's kind of just, it depends on what faces you select, and it's hard to exactly determine which faces those are. If, however, you have something like this, please sit back for a moment and I'll help you get this so that it looks like this. And if you already have this, you can probably skip ahead a little bit in this until we get to something you care about. For those of you who have a UV layout that looks like this, what we first need to do is we need to go to Select, Edge Mode, and in the UV texture editor, pardon, we're going to select this row of edges. We can do that by going Select and, sorry, wrong select. Even though you're working in the UV, since we're editing faces and that's something that's on the model, we can still use the select here in the main window, and we can go Convert Selection to Edge Loop, and you should see that it hits the nice edge loop here for the Phantasm Ball's body. We then need to hold down the Control key and deselect, some of the edges that got selected. Mostly, we want to make sure that we don't have these diagonal edges here selected, and we want to make sure that these edges here on the side didn't get selected. With just this line of edges chosen, we're going to hit Cut, which is this pair of scissors right here, and then we're going to go to UV mode, so select UV. At this point, I'm assuming some people have probably been exposed to the radial menu, but the radial menu is not showing up in my Camtasia recording, so I have to avoid using it. Now, with UV mode, while in UV mode, we can select one point here. We then go to Select, Convert Selection, and do to UV Shell. That should only select this little column of the squares. We're then going to push this over here. Then we're going to go back to Edge mode, select the edges, go Select, Convert Selection, do a to edge loop again. Again, we're going to hold down the left Control key and drag deselect these two edges here so that we just have this upper row. And then we're going to hit Move and Sew. That should fuse that edge back together. Then we can go to Select, go back to UV mode. We can then select just a random bit of these guys, go to Select, Convert Selection, go to UV Shell, so that we grab the whole thing, and then we just want to move it over a little bit so that it lines up with the original. And now you'll see we've got the sphere that was slightly offset looking like the sphere we want. I'm now going to delete this other sphere since that was its only purpose in this tutorial. And now that everyone is on the same page with their UVs, the bottom sphere here now looking like this pattern instead of the other one, we are ready to begin actually forming this UV map into the shape we need for the Phantasm Ball texture, which you will be provided with at the end of the tutorial. Now, before we get any further, I'm going to actually turn on this feature here. You'll see this thick blue square over here next to the thinner white one. This will turn on edge bolding, and this will allow us to see any exterior edge. This will be very helpful in the next few steps. Next, we're going to go to edge mode. Again, I'm using the select edge mode, face, and all that stuff over here. If you are familiar with the radial menu, which is used by holding down right mouse, you are free to use that as well. I cannot use that for these tutorials because Camtasia will not record the radial menu for some reason. So I'll be doing it the grunt way so that everyone can keep up and follow along. So going into edge mode, I'm going to select these 5 edges, the ones that are formed on the lines here, 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 and here. Next, I'm then going to go to select, convert selection, go to edge loop. It should look something like this, and then I'm going to deselect the top 2 edges and the divided edges there. So you now should have something that looks like this. And then, as the final bit for this, we're going to cut. And you should see, if you deselect it, these nice thick white lines forming the UV shell into 6 columns of 3 cubes. With that done, we then want to stay in edge mode, and we want to select the edges here. We then want to do move and sew, which is this option right here. It should form this lovely little point here. You need to do this for each column of 3. You can't do them all at once though, because if you do them all at once, you'll get something like this, which isn't what we want. We want to do, so you will have to do each column one at a time. If I can select the edges, there we go. With that done then, our last thing we need to do, at least for this little bit, is we want to go back into UV mode. We want to select some of the UVs here. We then want to go to select, convert selection to UV shell, so that we get the entirety of this thing. We then want to deselect the top 2 rows here. And then we want to go to polygons, and we want to hit the little square beside the option called unfold. In here, we just want to make sure that certain things are the correct settings. We should have 0 here. Pin UV should be checked, but this should be the radial button checked. And basically, it should look something like this in its entirety. After you've made sure of these settings, and you can pause the video if you'd like, please hit apply and close. And you should get something like this. It turns our lovely columns into several pie slices. With that then done, we're going to go back into edge mode. And we're going to select the edges right here. And we're going to cut right there so that we have 2 sorry, I'm trying to do 2 UV shell here, so that we have 2 separates of this lovely these lovely pie pieces or flower petals or whatever you want to call them. We then are going to drag select all of these real quick, and we want to move them down here for a moment. The next thing we need to do is we actually need to go into face mode, and we need to select this big white cube here. This big white cube actually represents the upper edge of all of our Phantasm Ball base. This is where we extruded edges during the modeling tutorial, and when you extrude edges, this is usually how Maya is the only way Maya can really handle it, is just saying, okay, make every new square line up with the very borders of the UV texture square. So with those faces selected, again, to select them, just make sure you're in face mode and then drag select this cube here. We're going to go to create UVs in the main window. We're going to go to planar mapping. We're going to hit the little square, and we're going to make sure that we're projecting down the y-axis, which means we're doing it up and down. Hit project, and you should see your UV screen change as well as your main windows change so that we have just that upper ring of edges selected. We're then going to go back to UV mode, select just those edges, going to go to use the move tool, and we're going to just get that a little off center so it's easier to work with. And now we need to start selecting every other edge on these things here, because we have to get this up here to line up with its pieces down here. To do this, we're actually going to go back to our main window, and going into edge mode, we're going to select this edge, basically the edges that are in between the larger double squares here. So this, you need to select each edge that is in this position where it's bound on two sides by one of the upper squares. With those edges selected, we're then going to hit cut over in the UV texture editor, and then we're going to go to select. We're going to go to UV mode. We're going to then drag select the entire sphere, and then we're going to use our friend the unfold option again. It'll take a few moments to think, but then you should notice that the whole thing kind of shifts off center. If you then select some of these and you do select, convert selection to shell, you notice it's cut it into its individual pieces, which is exactly what we want. With the UVs now unfolded for the top rim of the Phantasm Ball's base sphere, we're now going to just kind of organize them into a semi-smart format. To do this, I'm actually going to go back, make sure I'm in UV mode. I'm also going to go down to convert selections, and I'm going to click this little dotted line here at the top of the menu. This will make that part of the menu into its own independent window. That way I can use the tools here without having to constantly go up to a menu and select it. You can do this for any menu as long as it has this little dotted line on top of it, which for Maya is every menu. Now we're going to just kind of select, and since I have this lovely thing over here, I can just click to UV shell. And we want to organize these just so that they're all oriented about the same. So I'm using the 45-degree rotate tools up here. These are very helpful for just kind of quickly rotating something. And you can see the convenience of having the menu open inside a separate window, because I've been able to do a 2 UV shell very quickly. You can do it just as quickly using the radial menu, but as I believe I've mentioned before, I cannot use the radial menus in this tutorial because A, they're semi-high level Maya, and B, Camtasia is not recording when those are open, so it makes it very hard to demonstrate what's going on when you can't see the radial menu in my video. With these now oriented semi-similarly, we're going to do one thing where we're going to grab the bottom edge of each one, like this. I'm using Shift Select so that I grab all these UVs, and then I'm going to use this tool here, which is the, if I can get the tooltip to come up, align selected UVs to the minimum V value, which basically, as the picture describes, pushes everything down towards the bottom and makes it match its lowest member. And we want to level out each row of these. If you don't select enough, just reselect. That'll be fine. If you select too much, just hit the Control Z. But we need to just kind of go through all these real quick. I'm actually going to rotate this one a little bit more. There, that's a little better. So we now should have a nice set that kind of looks like this. And next we're going to grab all these, grab the like outer pair, all like this, and we're going to do a push like this so that they all line up. We're going to keep doing this for each pair, each vertical pair, we'll call it. I'm holding down the Control Shift key while I'm doing the Control key and the Shift key when I'm doing all this. That way I'm sure I'm getting everything properly selected. Because when you hold down the Control Shift, it only adds to your selections. It never takes anything away. The Shift key allows selection toggling, so that's helpful in its own right at times, while just holding down the left control key will allow you to deselect things. You're all familiar with that, I assume, but better to repeat myself than leave people confused. And by the end of all that, using these lovely push tools, we should get a line of these guys looking all pretty much exactly the same. I'm then going to just overlay these right on top of each other, as such. And then as a last step, to make sure they all line up perfectly, I'm going to use the to minimum V value and to maximum V value so that we have all 6 of those things piled right on top of each other. This now allows us to bring them in here, and we need to make them line up with our pie chart things we already cut out. So we're going to lower this down here. I'm going to use the scale tool to shrink them down as such. Then the move tool to get them back into position. Then I'm going to select these edges here and this vertex here, and again using my lovely align tools here, we're going to gently nudge these into position. Except for, you'll notice that we don't have the same amount of edges. We have these edges here that don't line up with anything on our pie chart. These edges, or I should say these squares here, represent the vertical faces on our phantasm ball here and here and all around the sphere. And we don't have anything that lines up with them on the exterior face. For them, we can just kind of make sure they line up something like this. This is a part where it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but it really does help later if they're kind of positioned as such. Now that we've got these guys properly sized, properly positioned, they're basically ready to be placed. Now we just got to place them. The best way to do this is we'll select one of these UVs here, use our to shell option, and we're going to just separate them out real quick so that they're into their 6 individual pieces again. And once they're 6 separate pieces again, we need to then go to edge mode, pick one, and select the edge. You'll notice this edge here, if I turn off the line bolding for a second, makes this edge here glow up when I light up as well when I select it. That means these are the same edge, and that means this piece here lines up with this piece over here. This is very helpful because then we can go to select, go back to UV mode, and just move this into position, like such. I'm going to keep doing this for the different pieces. So this one here goes with that one over there. This piece here lines up with this one over here. This one here, there. I'm going to shut up now. And you basically just need to repeat this process until you've got all of them lined up. And now our final step, now that we've got these all lined up, is try to make them match vertically, at least closely. And then we're going to grab this entire part of it, and we're going to move it over right on top of the other pieces. You should be able to get the lines to line up fairly closely. It'll hard to get it exactly right, but if you most of the time the issue will be in the lines here. And the way you can fix this is again using our very good friend, the align tools, and just lining everything up again. And when you're done, you should have something that looks kind of like this. I'm going to turn on the edge bolding again. And that is our UV layout for the bottom of the Phantasm Ball. And we are now ready to begin the second step of the UV layout tutorial for the Phantasm Ball by tackling the upper sphere. To start with this, we need to do something about our neck. If we go into face mode, and we just select just the neck edges, you'll notice that they form a straight line in the UV texture editor. This is not what we want. So we're going to go to Create UVs, and we're going to do a cylindrical mapping. Default settings should work, but if we want to double check them, there's not a lot of settings. So we're going to do Create Cylindrical Mapping. Then we're going to go to Select, go to UV mode, grab a few of them, then do Select, Convert Selection, and we're then going to go to UV Shell. Then using the Move tool, we're going to just nudge this out of the way because now that they've been laid out like this, they're basically what we need them to be for the Phantasm Ball's texture. I'm going to scale them down a bit so that they're not as much in the way, but otherwise that's about all we need to do with the neck of the Phantasm Ball. As for the body, as for the main spherical part of the body, we're going to be doing something similar to what we did with the Phantasm Ball's basin, where we're going to be creating these pie piece shaped UVs. To do this, we're going to use the exact same technique we did. So we're going to go first to edge mode. We're going to select every third edge so that we are dividing this lovely UV map into 6 columns of 3. We're then going to go to Select, Convert Selection, to Edge Loop so that we have our 3 lines, and we're going to deselect the edges here at the bottom. We're also going to deselect the edges over here because we don't want to cut up our head either. Finally, we're then going to do a cut. We should see these lovely lines form here. Then we're going to go back to UV mode, select the bottom UVs here, and with them selected, we're going to go to polygon. We're going to select everything else except those. Then we're going to go polygons, and we're going to do an unfold. And we should get a result like this, which, like I said, looks very similar to what we did with this. We're then going to go back to edge mode. We're going to edge mode. We're going to select this face here, and we're going to cut it. That way, we can go back to UV mode, grab these, go to our 2UV shell, and just make sure that we have 2 separate pieces that we can then overlay on top of each other like this. And that is the lovely, very simple second step to making the UV layout for the Phantasm Ball in the upper sphere section. The last thing we're actually going to do now is we're going to make a save version. Since we've done a bit of work here, I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to name this Phantasm Ball Tutorial UV1. So that way I know that it's my UV layouting, my first version of my UV layouting. And now that we've saved, we are ready for the third step of the Phantasm Ball modeling tutorial. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, we've now done the bottom sphere and the top sphere. You'll notice here in the UV texture editor, we've got them just like that. I've moved them off what Scott likes to refer to as the operating table, which is the actual middle of the map, middle of this gray square here. Whenever we do projections or anything, that's where Maya likes to put them. So moving stuff off makes it a little cleaner and a little easier to work with. So this is our bottom sphere, this is our top sphere stuff. We're just going to keep it order. We're now going to do what was our third step with the Phantasm Ball tutorials modeling section, which was we're going to do the pipes. Now, the pipes all need the exact same UV map, but there are two ways we could go about this. We could do each one individually, and thus we'll have to do the same stuff 3 times, or we can do a little destructive remodeling, and I'm going to actually open my outliner for a moment. I'm going to delete pipe group 2 and pipe group 3. That way we're only left with one Phantasm Ball pipe. I'm actually looking at this bad boy backwards. And with just the third pipe, with the first pipe selected, I'm going to go in, select the pipe. I've got to pull the UV texture editor out of the way, and I'm going to zero out its X rotation for a moment. That'll put the pipe right there. And I'm going to actually remove it from the Phantasm Ball's Pball layer, remove selected objects like so. That way I can turn the rest of the Phantasm Ball into a transparency, but still have the pipe. Now you're going to ask, why did we do all this? Because we want to be able to use our planar and cylindrical projections, and they work best when a model, or a piece of a model in this case, is lined up with the axes. So, going back to getting rid of our outliner for a moment and going back to our UV texture editor, you'll notice the pipe at the current moment has a texture that looks kind of like this. Not what we want. So first, I'm going to go to face mode, and I'm going to select the top faces and the bottom faces of the rim and deselect the stuff in the middle I've gotten. Hopefully I can do this correctly. You should have see, I didn't do it right. So you should have this selected here and this selected there. The next thing we need to do is then, with those selected, we're going to go to create UVs, do a planar mapping, make sure you hit the little square here and make sure you're using a Y projection. When you do this, you should see something like this pop up into the UV texture editor. We're then going to go back to UV mode, grab this, go to convert selection to shell, so we've got the whole thing. Make sure we have our lovely little move tool, and we're going to move this off our operating table. And I'm actually going to scale it down a little bit at this time since I have the opportunity. The next bits we need to worry about is the actual sides of this. So we can actually go to select face mode, and instead of doing face mode here, we can do face mode over here to grab everything else we need. And we're going to do create UVs and do a cylindrical mapping. We can again just use the default settings because cylindrical mappings do not have that many settings to worry about. We can then go back to UV mode, grab these guys and do our lovely convert selection to UV shell, scale them down a bit so that they're at a more manageable size, and then we can start peeling these pieces apart. The way we'll do this is I'm actually going to open this convert selection menu again, just so that I always have it on screen. I'm going to click select one of the UVs, and I'm going to do a 2 UV shell and move it off. The reason we're able to do this is that the faces we had selected earlier didn't have any common edges horizontally, so that when they were mapped, they were actually mapped into 3 separate UV shells instead of one big one, like when we were using when we were doing the Phantasm Ball lower sphere and upper sphere. As you can see, this here is the rim, this here is the outer base, and this here is the interior of the pipe. And we just want to organize these like so. Just so that we make sure that we remember that this is the bottom, this is the rim on the outside, and this is the inside. And it kind of follows a logical order. If you start from here and you go up along if you go around the pipe's edges, it's like you got to go through here, then you hit these, and then you go inside to these. The last thing we need to do, I'm going to move these off the operating table for a moment, is we need to just slightly adjust our projections of the upper lip and lower lip of the pipe. To do this, we're going to just select one of the edges, one of the vertices, just click select, do a 2 UV shell, and then I'm going to use my scale tool to bring it down. Now I want to make sure I have the top edge selected so that the the bottom edge, there's the word I'm looking for, is on the outer ring, and it has this nice like gem or double circle shape. And then we're going to move this one off the operating table. Now that finishes the UV mapping for the pipe, which was very simple. And then the last thing we need to do before the pipe is actually done is we just need to re-replicate it. So we're going to go close our UV texture editor for a moment. I'm going to get rid of the convert selection tool. I'm going to go back to object and component mode. I'm going to set the X on the pipe back to 45. Then, by opening my outliner, I can select the pipe group 1, which we have from our previous modeling tutorial, and I can just do an edit, duplicate, rotate that one around by 120, do an edit, duplicate, and I can rotate this one around the y-axis with a 240. Again, I'm changing the values over here in the channel box layer editor. And now we've got our 3 pipes back, but more importantly, if we reopen the UV texture editor, we'll see that each pipe now has their UVs already aligned correctly. This has saved us a lot of work of having to actually repeat the UV process, where instead we had to repeat the much simpler process of just duplicating our pipes. We are now ready for the 4th step, which will be to UV unwrap the head of the phantasm ball. Before we get into that, however, I'm going to minimize my UV texture editor, because we need to get the pipes back into our phantasm ball layer, and we need to pull the head out. So this will be a real quick to do. We're going to just turn the phantasm ball layer back to normal operation. That way we can select everything. We're then going to go to our outliner, grab the pipes and their groups, then right click on the layer and do an add selected objects. We can make sure we did it right by clicking the V. The pipe should disappear with everything else. Then we'll select our head, right click and do a remove selected objects. That way we have just the head, and then we're going to turn the rest of the phantasm ball to transparency mode. That way we can easily handle the head without having to deal with the rest of the phantasm ball. Now with that done, I'm going to close my outliner. We're going to open our UV texture editor, and we're going to select the head. You'll notice it looks fairly jumbled. To fix this, which is the very point of this tutorial, we're first going to go to edge mode, and we're going to worry about selecting the edges that face out, like so. I'm going to call these I don't know. I can't think of a proper name for these edges, but you just need to select these edges here that kind of line up with the XY plane, I think, would be the best. Yeah, these are the edges that stick out from or are perpendicular to the XY plane. There we go. With those edges selected, we're then going to go to select, convert selection, and we're going to do a 2-edge ring, so that we select all the edges in those loops, and then we're going to do a select, convert selection, and then we're going to go 2 faces. This will allow us to get all the faces that are in those rings. Then we're going to go and do a cylindrical mapping, but you notice when we do it, it doesn't quite turn out the way we would hope. That's because the cylindrical mapping is lined up vertically instead of horizontally. To change this, we're going to set the rotate X here, since the channel box tends to open when this happens, and we're going to set this to 90. Still, it doesn't quite look right. That's because the phantasm ball has edges that line up perfectly with the seams around the cylindrical mapping. So to fix this, we're just going to take our rotate Z and we're going to type in a 1, just 1 degree. And you'll notice that instantly fixes most of our troubles with the UV texture editor. With that done, we can then go into UV mode, drag select, do a little 2 UV shell, and I'm going to get my move tool, and I'm going to pull these over here, and I'm just going to scale them down. These are basically ready for what we need them for later. And that's a good thing. The next bits we have to worry about are the faces that line up with the z-axis. Now, we could go through the pains of selecting all of those, but basically we want to play with everything that we haven't already selected. To do this, we can just go to face mode and grab all the rest of these over here. This will select everything that we didn't select in our first pass and allow us to do a planar mapping, but this time we want to make sure we're doing it along the z-axis. So again, we want to make sure we hit the little square here and make sure we do it along the z-axis, and then we can hit project. You should get something like this, kind of the phantasm ball's head staring you straight down in the UV texture editor. Going into UV mode and grabbing all those, we're going to first shrink them down a bit since they don't need to be that big. And we're going to start separating these out. The best way to do this is we're going to go to edge mode, and we're going to select this edge here and this edge here, basically the twins on either side of the divider line. We're then going to go to select two UVs. Actually, I'm going to go to UV mode first so I can do this. Select two UVs, select two UV shell, then we're going to use our move tool to just push them out of the way like so. Sorry, we're going to select that edge, that edge ring, that edge ring. Do the same thing we did where we'll go convert selection, two UVs, convert selection, two UV shell, and we're going to move these out of the way. I've actually mixed those up. Sorry. We need to make sure that we have this one here, which represents the interior rings here, farther out than the other one. Sorry. I know it's like big difference there, but still we need to make sure these are in semi-right order for later. And the final thing we want to do is, well, actually, the last thing we need to do for the phantasm ball's head to actually separate things out is that while this piece here is exactly the way we want it, we need to separate the eyes out. The best way to do this, I find, is we'll go to select, we'll go to faces, we'll select the interior face here and here of each eye. You should have only four faces selected. Then we're going to go to select, grow selection region. This will basically select any neighbors to that face, which for us means it will also grab the interiors of the eye sockets without anything else. With those selected, we're then going to go to create UVs, and we're going to use an automatic mapping. And you may be asking why we're going to use an automatic mapping, because it separates everything out like this very nicely. We're then going to go to convert selection to UVs, and using the move tool, we're going to push these up away from everything else. We'll then grab everything else using UV mode. Grab everything else in UV mode. Just push it off to the side so that it's off the operating table. I'm going to put it up here since I know I haven't put anything up here from the rest of the tutorial. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move these back onto our operating table so that we can mess with them a bit. Now we're going to use our scale tool to shrink down these faces, which represent our phantasm ball's socket eyes. And then I'm going to figure out which of these faces represents the interior faces of our eyes. So I'm going to go back into face mode, and I'm going to select here, 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 and here. So here are the faces for us. So I'm going to go into UV mode. Actually, I'm going to go select, convert selection to UVs. Then I'm going to use the move tool to just separate these bad boys out for a moment so that they're separate from all the others. I'm going to open my convert selection dialog since that's a very helpful thing in this tutorial. Don't know why. And so these here are the actual faces that represent the interior of the eyes. Now the reason we want these separate is that we can then use a lovely little trick where we're going to do, you go into edge mode, select an edge, and do a move and sew. Select this edge, move and sew. Select this edge, move and sew. And we should get this nice kind of unfolded box look for one of the eyes. We can keep doing this for each eye. I'm going to just make sure they're nice and spaced out so that when we do it, they don't start to overlap. And going back into edge mode, we can do a move and so, move and so. And you'll notice here, this one actually jumped up there for some reason. So we're going to save this one for last. Move and so, move and so, move and so, to and throw. Oh, this one jumped too. I don't know why. It's hard to tell when one will decide to jump and when one will decide not to jump. Still, we can keep going with what we were doing. Actually, I'm going, since this one seems to want to play the game of I want to snap to the other object, we're going to move this up here so that it stays separate. And then we're going to go back into edge mode. Move and so. Move and so. Move and so. Move and so. That way we have our nice 4 splayed out eye sockets for the phantasm ball. And as our final step, we're going to go back to UV mode. Go to shell, and we're going to just lie these guys on top of each other. Just kind of like what we did with all those pieces from the upper rim of the phantasm ball's bottom sphere. And when they're all lied on top of each other, we're going to move them over here. We're going to scale them down, and we're basically just going to kind of put them inside this ring here. And that finishes the UV unwrapping for the phantasm ball's head. Final step in unwrapping the UVs for the phantasm ball, and that will be to unwrap the antenna for the phantasm ball. To do this, we're going to first, I'm going to get rid of my UV texture editor for a moment because we need to first re-add the head to the phantasm ball layer. When we do that, it should go nice and transparent. And next we need to delete one of our antenna, and we need to remove the other antenna from the phantasm ball layer. This will allow us to do the transparency on the phantasm ball layer, but still have the antenna we're going to work on for the UV unwrapping. And like with the pipes, the reason we deleted the other antenna is that we can do the UV unwrapping for one antenna and then just reduplicate it over to the other side to save ourselves time and effort. For the first antenna, we're going to also minimize the rotate Z and hit it back to 0, because all projections and UV systems tend to work a whole lot better when things are standing vertically and are axis aligned. And with our lovely antenna realigned vertically and ready for thing, I'm going to reopen the UV texture editor, and that way we can take a look at the current UV layout for the antenna, which is itself not too bad, but not what we're going to use. What we are going to use is we're going to do create cylindrical mapping. When we do this, you'll notice it kind of turns out a little wonky. To fix this kind of thing, I'm actually going to go into edge mode. I'm going to cut the edge here for these two things here, like so, and you'll notice I have the bolding turned on, which helps me see and make sure that I'm cutting faces and they're getting cut. I then can go and select these two edges here and do a move and so that they're now joined over there. And then by going back to UV mode, I can just grab this point UV and use the move tool to bring it back over here. This is all we really need to get this working. Now the next step we need to worry about is I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to scale it down a bit so that it fits into our fits on our operating table. Reposition it a little bit. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to select all these edges, all these interior edges to these points, and I'm going to cut them. Then, going back into UV mode, I'm going to select each one and kind of just separate them out so that instead of having just one big point or two big points at this step, we have several smaller ones, kind of like a bed of spikes look. This is a good opportunity to use shift select here so that I'm only getting the one I want. There we go. With that done, the next thing we're going to do is we actually are going to resize this a little bit again so that it's like this, about like this. Doesn't have to be exact. And then we're going to go into our view mode here, and we're going to select this. We're going to go into edge mode, pardon, and we're going to select this ring of edges by going, and then we're going to use our convert selection tool and do our two edge loop. The reason we're doing this is because, like with the pipes and the other parts of the Phantasm Ball, these faces here are hidden because these two lines are lying right on top of each other. To fix this, and to in the way that we're going to for the antenna, we're just going to select this edge here, go to convert selection to UVs, and with the move tool selected, we're just going to push them up a little bit. That'll expose this face for the texture. We're just going to keep doing that by going convert selection to edge loop, and like before, I'm actually going to keep the convert selection box open so that I don't have to keep opening it from the menu, and then I can just keep repeating myself until I've worked my way all the way down the Phantasm Ball's antenna. Oops. There we go. There we go. With those done, we can then just grab them all, and we're going to scale this out a little bit so that it's more like this, and that's actually all we need to do for the UV unwrapping of the antenna. Pretty easy. The last step after we've got this lovely thing undone is I'm going to actually move it off the operating table for later, and then I'm going to go back into object mode in the main window. I'm going to minimize my UV texture editor so it's out of the way, and then I'm just going to set this back to 45 so that the antenna is back in its correct position, and then I'm going to do an edit, duplicate, and I'm going to set the other antenna back at the negative 45 where it's supposed to be. Finally, I can then turn the Phantasm Ball layer back to normal, grab everything, make sure everything is a part of the layer, like so, and then I can open up my UV texture editor and just kind of look at all these wonderful little pieces we've now UV unwrapped. These are all the pieces we need to give the Phantasm Ball the texture that that's been pre-prepared. Now you will find the texture, as you will read in the instruction. The texture we're going to be using is, if I open this up in a Windows viewer for a moment, this is the texture we'll be using for the Phantasm Ball. Pretty steampunk, I know, but it looks cool. Now ready to apply the texture to our Phantasm Ball and line the UVs up with that given texture. Now, to do this, we're just first going to go to Window, Rendering Editors, and we're going to open our Hypershader. With the Hypershader open, we're going to create a new Lambert, and I'm going to double click on that Lambert so that I can get my attribute editor open, and I'm going to rename that Lambert Pball Texture. With that renamed, I'm going to go down to the Common Material Attributes, go to Color, and click on the little checkerboard square beside it. That'll bring up the Create Render Node window. From that, I want to select the File option. With the File option selected, I then want to click on the little File folder, and with that, I want to navigate to and open my Phantasm Ball texture, which you see here. Once you've done that, you should see the same texture here in the texture sample. And if you've done everything right, the new Lambert should have the phantasm ball texture kind of applied to it spherically. If none of this happened, I would delete the texture and try again, since it's a little harder to troubleshoot it once you've actually created everything. With all that done, we're going to move the hypershader to this other side now, and we're going to drag select everything from our phantasm ball, and then I'm going to hold down the right mouse button, and in case my radial menu isn't showing up in the screen capture, with your right mouse button held down, with the radial menu open, I need you to go to Assign Material to Selection. You should, if you're in gray mode, which is you should see the phantasm ball get a little lighter, but if you want to make sure you did everything right, make sure to hit the 6 key on your keyboard. This will turn on texture rendering for the phantasm ball and allow us to see that the texture has actually been applied. Nothing lines up at the moment, but everything's been applied. With that done, we can minimize the hypershader, and we can open our UV texture editor, and we can start lining our pieces and parts that we've laid out up with everything we've done here. Now I'm going to start where I've started on all of the tutorial, and I'm going to start with the bottom sphere here. Now in our texture, since this was made for a different phantasm ball originally done by Danny Parks, he has his bottom sphere pieces lined up like this, where we have ours lying on top of each other. Both ways work, though ours is designed to save a little bit more space than his. Still, since ours will work just fine with his texture, we're going to go and make sure we're in UV mode, grab the UVs for the bottom part, and we're going to move them up and just scale and nudge them until they're in position. Now you'll notice I'm switching back and forth between scale and translate very quickly. This is because I'm using the keyboard shortcuts to help me get everything in position. If you too want to use the keyboard shortcuts, you can use the move tool by hitting the I'm sorry, blanking a moment, hitting the W key. And if you want to use the scale tool, you can hit the R key. So W for translate, R for rotate. Make sure your caps locks is off because Maya is case sensitive. If you're trying to do this with the cap locks on, it won't work. So you'll notice we have to do a little tweaking and pulling and nudging to get everything to line up. But that's the nature of doing this for the phantasm ball or for any model, is you'll have to fiddle with the UVs as well as fiddle with the texture when you're the one creating the texture to get everything to line up exactly right. There we go. And so now if we look at our phantasm ball in object mode, we should see we have a nice kind of plated lower bottom for our steampunk phantasm ball. Next, we need to do the upper sphere. Now, the upper sphere has two parts. It has its sphere part, which is spread out like pie pieces, like the bottom sphere, and it also has its neck bit. For the sphere part, we're going to line everything up with these pieces over here, and like with the bottom, I'm just going to use one of these since I've got since I have the pie pieces lined up right on top of each other, and it will work just fine. Except when we get things in position here, we should be able to notice one little issue. The first issue is the fact that we have these very hard lines here in the texture because our pie pieces aren't lining up exactly with the texture. Also, we should see here that we have sections where the holes in the texture meant for the pipes aren't lining up correctly. The reason for this, the way we can fix this is simply if we grab one of the UVs, just one UV, and we do our two shell operation, we can then hit our horizontal flip, and you'll notice suddenly that now everything is lining up correctly. The reason the holes were not lining up was simply because we had needed to flip some of the UVs horizontally. But still, that leaves us with these nice dark lines everywhere and some slight mismatching. To fix this, I'm actually going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to cut these edges here along the seams for each section of the pie pieces. And to make sure I cut them, I can use my bold or edge boulder. What is that called? Toggle display of texture borders for the active mesh. Yeah, there we go. With that then, with these faces now cut, I can go back to UV mode. I'm going to leave my little convert selection box open because it's really helpful, and just kind of start nudging and playing with these independently so that I make sure they line up with each of their own pieces of the texture. I can do that the same thing for all of these. And when I'm done, I should be able to go back to my window and see that the texture looks very nice, but we have one issue still, and that's the holes aren't lining up with the pipes. That's just because of sheer happenstance of how we cut the holes for our phantasm ball, or at least separated out our upper sphere's UVs. This, however, can be easily fixed for the simple fact that if we use our rotate tool, and because everything is still a separate object, we can just rotate the holes about, I'd say, 9 degrees to get everything to line up again at least closely. Then all we need to do is select our pipes and translate them down just a little bit so that we have these nice textures that line up. Ta-da! Speaking of pipes, with them selected, we can now get their UVs into position. So going back to UV mode, I'm going to grab the pipes UVs and move them up here. Now the UVs for the pipes are this thing here, and this thing here. This being the outside of the pipe, inside of the pipe, and the parts of the edge. So we can start lining everything up piece by piece. So I can grab the inside of the pipe, which is for us this top bit here, lower it down, and get everything lined up. As you can tell, they're doing some fake shadowing here where the top edge of the interior of the pipe has a little bit more light than everything else to make it look like it's getting darker and more shadowed the deeper you go in the pipe. For the outside of the pipe, we have these lovely wooden textures, wooden and steel textures, very steampunk, I say again. And the upper part, the outer lip of the pipe, is meant to be this bit here. While the actual main body of the pipe is meant to be this bit here. And now for the final bit, we just need to line up the edges of the pipe with these. Now, this is something I want you to check because it may be different for you, but if I do a 2 shell on my outer ring here, I'll notice that for my pipes, that's actually the bottom part of the pipe lip. That means that I've actually got these reversed, and that leads me to believe you may have them reversed, but double check. Still, we want to make sure that the underlip of the pipe, the UVs for the underlip of all the pipes, line up with the dark circle here. Since they're meant to be under the pipe, thus they're going to be in shadow, or at least pseudo shadow, thanks to this texture. And again, we need to make sure that everything fits fairly snugly, so just feel free to scale and nudge your UVs so that they line up with our texture. And then we're going to do the same for our top, except we're going to make it line up with the much brighter outer gray texture, since that's something that's meant to look as if it's out in the light, and thus doesn't need its fake shadowing. And with that done, we can now admire our now fairly nice looking pipes. Don't they look pretty? And we can continue on to do the neck of the Phantasm Ball's main pipe. Now, for the original Phantasm Ball, the neck is supposed to be, strangely enough, this very gray, metally looking patch here. I've personally never really liked that. So, for this version, I'm actually going to double up, and I'm going to use the texture that we got for the pipe, for the pipes, and use it as the texture for the Phantasm Ball's neck. I think it adds a nice bit of aesthetics, but still, this is proof to the point that you don't always have to follow everything step by step as if it was a cookbook. We can also kind of overlap these UVs to get it to line up, since the neck of our Phantasm Ball actually extends a fair distance into the Phantasm Ball's head. Now this will lead to a little bit of a dirty UV map, as you see, but this is something that is created because of the fact we're using a UV map that at the moment we can't alter, because we're going to be looking at altering it later next week. Or during the next tutorial, I should be saying. If there is a next tutorial. Now, with all that done, we can select the Phantasm Ball's head, and we have all these lovely UVs here to use for our Phantasm Ball's head. And you'll notice they line up fairly well with several aspects of the existing texture. We have our nice 3 items here that line up with these 3 circles here that are meant to represent the Phantasm Ball's face, rings, all that stuff. So I'm going to grab these, and like I've done with all the other pieces, I'm going to gently nudge and resize them until they fit with the existing texture. Now, you wouldn't usually be doing this kind of stuff for a texture, because you would usually develop the UV layout and then develop your texture for that given model based on that UV layout. But since we're going just with what we have here, we're going to just have to nudge and play with our UVs until they line up fairly nicely. And see, if we look back at our perspective view, we're starting to get a fairly nice Phantasm Ball head. So we can just keep lining everything up. All it is just a bunch of moving, scaling, tweaking, and adjusting. Fairly easy compared to everything else we've had to do for this tutorial. And then for the Phantasm Ball's the rounded parts of the head, we have this interesting thing where we have these holes, like we have on the rest of the texture. The holes are meant to give a little shadowing. Where are those holes? So we'll line everything up. As you can see, the holes on this one are kind of covered up by the fact that we're using larger proportions than for the original Phantasm Ball. But, again, it still gives the Phantasm Ball's head a nice, very steampunk look. And everything seems to line up quite nicely, doesn't it? The final thing we have to worry about are the antenna's textures. So we'll grab those, and it should be fairly apparent where they fit in. If we look here, we have these very nice lines here for the Phantasm Ball's antenna texture. And this one we may actually work a little bit more to make sure that they line up just right. So, little scaling. And here we're actually running into an interesting situation where on an older version of the Phantasm Ball, they used a lower poly antenna than I used for my version. Still, we can make this work by just shortening these tips. And this is a lot of stuff you'll have to do for if you're in the pipelines course and you're not just watching this texture. This is the kind of stuff you'll have to do when you get to creating your class projects, because since we don't have access to proper texture artists, we will have to rely on people doing their textures based off photos off the internet. Kind of scrounging for your textures, for example. And because of this, it's good to be able to kind of like see a texture that's been presented to you and getting your UVs to line up with it fairly close, but enough that it at least yields a good looking result. In the end, all that really matters is that the UVs for the Phantasm Ball and its end result looks good. The UV map needs to look clean, but it's stuff that not everyone's going to see, unless you're actually looking at it in Maya. If you're just looking at it as a model, you have no clue what the UVs are going to have as an effect on it. And with that little bit of last little bit of manipulation on the UVs, we now have our lovely UV texture for the Phantasm Ball. A little overlapping here and there, but not bad. And as for the Phantasm Ball itself, he's looking quite cute now that he's all steampunked out. So that will actually conclude the Phantasm Ball UV and texturing tutorial. And as the final thing, we're going to go File, Save As, and we're just going to save this as Phantasm Ball Final. And I'm going to put my name at the end so that I know it's mine. With that, I'm going to save. And our Phantasm Ball is done, ready to go. At least one would think, but what have we forgotten to do? Okay, for those of you who couldn't guess, we just need to do a little bit of scene cleanup to make sure that the Phantasm Ball is ready to go into any game engine, should we want to take it into a game engine. To do that, we're going to drag select everything, and we're going to go Mesh Combined. That will turn the Phantasm Ball into a single, solitary model. Then we're going to go Edit, Delete All by Type, and delete the history for the Phantasm Ball, as well as go File, Optimize Scene, and make sure that everything is optimized and clean. Finally, we're going to go to Window, Outliner, rename the model Pball from Polysurface 1, and with that, we'll save it one more time, this time just saving over the final version we just saved. And now, honest to goodness, I promise the truth this time, the Phantasm Ball is done.